You really need to hear what these hikers encountered. It will change how you read strangers in the backcountry. In October of 2019, deep within the Nantahala National Forest of western North Carolina, a solo female thru-hiker named Alex Chambers arrived at Rufus Morgan Shelter, an Appalachian Trail lean-to sitting just 4 miles south of the Nantahala Outdoor Center. She was 34 days into her southbound hike. She needed one night of rest. Everything seemed normal until she reached the shelter platform. What she found there defied every instinct she had spent 8 months sharpening. 3 men, adults, well-fed, with gear spread across every inch of the shelter, introduced themselves one by one, smiling in sequence. They each gave the same name. By the end of that night, Alex had not slept. One fellow hiker, a 26-year-old solo man named Tommy, had not left with her at dawn. The men were gone by the time rangers arrived. Only one thing remained on the shelter platform: a small, trembling puppy that was not theirs to leave. What you are about to hear is the account. Her name is Alex Chambers, and this happened to her in October of 2019. This was the 3rd week of October. The leaves on the ridgeline above Wesser Bald had gone the color of old rust, and Alex Chambers had not spoken to another human being in 8 days. She was 34. Former project manager from Chicago. She had quit her job, signed the divorce papers, and mailed her apartment key back to her landlord in the same week. The trail was not a vacation. It was the only plan she had left. Her emergency contact, her sister, Donna, had not heard from her in 4 days. Not unusual, also not nothing. The Nantahala Gorge received her the way it receives everyone, indifferently. The river runs cold and fast below the knock, and the trail above it is steep enough to punish tired legs. Rufus Morgan Shelter sits at 2,360 feet, named after an Episcopal priest who helped cut these trails back in the 1950s. It is a real place, a wooden lean-to with a wire bear cable and a rainwater smell that has soaked into the wood permanently. It sleeps 6, technically 8 if people are willing to be friendly. Alex arrived at 4:47 p.m. with 14 miles already on her legs. Her left knee had been sending complaints since Waya Bald. Nothing sharp, just a whisper that was getting harder to ignore. 1 bar of LTE flickered on her phone screen and died before her location pin finished loading on Donna's Find My app. She carried a photo-laminated copy of her divorce decree in the top mesh pocket of her pack. She had never been able to explain why, even to herself. There is one thing worth knowing before we go further. The gorge was loud that evening. The river was doing what the river does. But the birdsong had already stopped, not because of the hour. She just hadn't registered it yet. She noticed the puppy before she noticed the men's faces. It was sitting in the far corner of the shelter platform, not moving, not wagging, just watching her, the way animals watch things they have decided they cannot escape. And behind it, 3 men she had never seen before sat with their gear spread across every inch of available space, smiling at her in a way that felt, just for a half second, like they had been waiting. The first one stood up when she stepped onto the platform. "I'm Daniel," he said. He was maybe 45, broad through the shoulders, clean shaved for someone this deep in the backcountry. He held eye contact the way you hold eye contact when someone has told you to, a half second longer than normal, just enough to feel deliberate. The second one looked up from where he was sitting cross-legged against the shelter wall. "I'm Daniel, too," he said, and smiled like this was a thing that happened all the time. The third, younger, maybe late 20s, hoodie pulled up despite the fact that it wasn't cold enough for a hood, was sitting in the far corner with the puppy in his lap. He didn't stand. He just looked at her with a small, patient smile and said, "And I'm also Daniel. We know. It's a lot." Alex laughed. She told herself it was funny. She set her pack down and started pulling out her sleep system. The shelter smelled like wet canvas and something underneath that. Faint, almost pharmaceutical. Not drugs, more like the inside of a first aid kit that had been closed too long. She filed it away as someone's gear spray or sunscreen and kept moving. There was another hiker already there. A guy named Tommy, 26, solo, thin in a way that looked like recent weight loss rather than trail fitness. He gave her a nod from his corner and went back to his journal. He had said almost nothing since she arrived, but she noticed he watched the three Daniels the way you watch something you have already decided about. She couldn't name the expression then. Later she would. It was relief. The look of someone who had been alone long enough to accept any door that opened. Within 20 minutes, the Daniels had pulled her into conversation. Easy stuff at first. Trail conditions south of Wesser. Weather coming in off the gorge. Hiker small talk that required nothing from her but noise. Then gradually, so gradually she couldn't have said when it shifted, one of them mentioned burnout, corporate burnout specifically. He described it with a kind of worn-out precision that meant he hadn't read about it. He had lived it. The Sunday night dread, the way it hollows out your week from the inside, the way you stop being able to remember who you were before the job became the whole thing. Alex had not mentioned her job. She told herself it was common ground. A lot of people on the trail were running from something like that. It wasn't strange. She noticed one of the Daniels had a water bottle with no brand markings. Not a generic bottle. A deliberately debranded one. Whatever label had been on it had been removed carefully, in one clean pull. She noticed it and could not explain why she noticed it, and set the thought down. By the time the fire outside the shelter had settled into coals, the youngest Daniel had said something that stopped her mid-bite. He hadn't said it to her directly. He'd said it quietly, almost to himself, like a thing he'd been sitting with all day. Sometimes it takes losing the thing you thought you wanted to find out what you actually needed. Nobody responded. The fire popped once. The puppy, Pixel they called it, said it had been abandoned on the trail near Wesser, pressed its nose against Alex's shin, and didn't move away. She fell asleep to the low sound of their voices outside. That was the part she couldn't explain later, not to the rangers, not to Donna, not to herself. She never fell asleep easily on trail. 8 months of ground sleeping, and her body still treated every noise like a threat assessment. She needed at least an hour of lying still before her brain would let go. That night, she was out before she heard them finish a sentence. She did not remember closing her eyes. She woke at 2 a.m. and the fire was still going. That was the first wrong thing. They had built it at maybe 6 p.m. 8 hours of burn on a backcountry fire meant someone had been feeding it through the night, which meant someone had not slept, which meant someone had been awake out there in the dark while she was unconscious 6 feet away, with her pack straps loose and her knife zipped into the top pocket where it was not useful to her. She lay still and listened. The Daniels were outside, all 3 of them, from the sound of it, and Tommy was with them. She could hear his voice in the mix, quieter than theirs, shorter responses but present. The conversation had a rhythm to it that was not a campfire conversation. It had turns. It had structure, like something with a shape she couldn't see from the outside. She pulled on her rain pants in the dark. The fabric caught on her left knee, and she had to work it over the joint slowly. It had swollen overnight, the skin tight and warm, in a way it hadn't been yesterday. She sat with that for a moment. The knee was real. The Daniels had not caused it. But it was real, and it meant she was slower than she'd been 24 hours ago, and she was 4 miles from the NOC on a trail that dropped hard through rhododendron in the dark. At breakfast, one of the Daniels, the broad one, the first Daniel, suggested she take a 0 day. He said it gently. He said the trail south toward Fontana had been rougher than expected lately. Solo women especially, he said. There had been an incident on that section recently. She asked him what incident. He couldn't name it. He said he thought he'd seen something on a trail forum. He said he just wanted her to be careful. She kept eating. Her phone was at 17%. She had not updated her location in 31 hours. Donna would not panic for another 2 days. That was the understanding they had, 48 hours before Donna called the NOC. But 2 days was not a long window. And the NOC was 4 miles below her through fog that had come in off the gorge overnight without a weather reason. She could not see the river from the shelter. She could not see the trail down. The world had shrunk to the platform, the trees, and the dying coals. Tommy found her while she was repacking. He said he was thinking about staying another day. He said it to the ground more than to her. The Daniels had been helpful, he said. They'd been talking through some stuff, processing things. She looked at him. He was 26 years old, and he had the specific exhaustion of someone who had been offered something and was trying to decide if it was real. She made a choice. She told herself it was not her place. She told herself he was an adult. She told herself she barely knew him. She did not push him. She did not say what she was thinking. She cinched her pack and told him to stay safe, and she meant it. Her sponsor, 14 months sober, something she had told exactly no one on trail, would have had something to say about that moment. Her sponsor had a line she used whenever Alex talked herself out of trusting her gut. She said, "When the explanation takes longer than the feeling, trust the feeling." Alex had the feeling. She had been having it since the first Daniel held eye contact 1 beat too long. She left anyway. At the tree line, she stopped and looked back. Tommy was sitting on the platform. The youngest Daniel was next to him, close, saying something low. Tommy was nodding. The puppy was watching her from the edge of the platform with its ears flat and its body completely still. She turned and walked into the fog. She made it 30 yards down the trail before she stopped. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the gorge do nothing. Then she turned around. She told herself she came back for the dog. It was the only explanation that made sense when she ran it through her head on those 30 yards of trail. Pixel would not survive being left with men who used it as furniture. That was a real thought about a real animal, and it gave her feet a direction, and she followed it back up the slope before she could think of a reason not to. She checked her watch at the tree line. 3:14 a.m. The fire was down to embers. The shelter was dark. She could hear the deep, metered breathing of people asleep, or people performing sleep, coming from the platform. She stepped up slowly, keeping her weight on the outside edges of her boots the way she'd learned to on wooden floors in old houses. The platform did not creak. 3 sleeping bags, all occupied, shapes in the dark, breathing in slow unison. She counted them. There were 4. She stood with that number and did not move. 3 Daniels, 1 Tommy, 4 sleeping bags, 4 bodies, everyone accounted for, nothing wrong. But Tommy's journal was open on the platform beside his bag, face down, which meant he had put it down mid-entry. She picked it up and turned her headlamp on low, cupping the lens with her palm so the light stayed small and red and close. Her hand was shaking enough that the words moved. They keep asking if I've ever hurt myself. Why do they keep asking that? I told them no. They asked again. They said it differently. They said, "Have you ever felt like you deserved something bad?" They said it like they already knew. She read it twice. Then she put the journal down exactly where she had found it, face down, open to the same page, and she did not look at the sleeping bags again. The chemical smell hit her then, stronger than before, not overwhelming, just present in a way it hadn't been at dinner, the way a smell gets when whatever was producing it has recently been used. She breathed through her mouth and picked up Pixel from the corner of the platform. The dog didn't make a sound. It pressed itself against her chest, and its whole body was rigid, every muscle locked, the way animals go still when stillness is the only option left. She was already stepping off the platform when she heard the voices, not from the shelter, from below, off trail down the slope, somewhere in the rhododendron thicket between the shelter and the gorge. Low voices, taking turns. The same structured rhythm she had heard through the fire the night before. The rhythm that had a shape, that moved like something rehearsed. The inside of her mouth tasted like copper pennies. She did not look toward the sound. She understood, in a way that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with 8 months of sleeping alone in the dark, that looking toward the sound was the wrong move. She kept her eyes on the trail. She kept her breathing shallow. Her kneecap buzzed with a sensation that was not quite pain, a deep electrical hum that ran from the joint up through her hip and didn't stop. She took 3 steps toward the tree line and then stopped. Tommy's gear was still on the platform. His sleeping bag, his boots, his journal. But the water bottle sitting next to his bag was not his. She knew it the same way she had known about the debranded bottle 2 days ago. Not because she had studied it, but because her brain had filed it and held it and was only now handing it back to her. Tommy had arrived at this shelter with a blue Nalgene, scuffed, sticker residue on the side from something he'd peeled off. She had seen it when he first sat down. The bottle next to his bag was clean. No markings. Label removed in one careful pull, identical to the Daniels. He had not arrived with that bottle. It had appeared after. She looked at the 4 sleeping bags one last time. She counted them again. 4. The voices in the rhododendron were still going, structured, patient, taking turns. Pixel had not moved, had not made a sound, had not stopped pressing itself against her sternum with every muscle locked and its small heart going so fast she could feel it against her own chest like a second clock running ahead of hers. She picked up her poles. She did not turn on her headlamp. She walked into the dark, and she did not look back at the shelter, and she did not look toward the sound in the rhododendron, and she did not stop moving until the trees closed behind her. The voices continued for a while after she left. She could tell because she listened for when they stopped. They didn't. She hiked 8 miles in the dark without a headlamp. Her trekking poles found the ground before her feet did. That was the system. Plant, feel, step, plant, feel, step. Pixel stayed tucked under her left arm the entire way down, rigid and silent, and Alex did not put her down once because putting her down meant stopping, and stopping meant listening, and she was not ready to hear what the mountain might say if she went quiet. Her niece screamed from mile 2 onward, not a whisper anymore. A full voice, sharp and specific, sending a message she filed and ignored. She would deal with it at the bottom. There was only the bottom. She hit the NOC parking lot at 6:49 a.m. The sun was still below the ridge. The river was loud and gray and completely indifferent, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen in her life. She sat down on the curb. She called Donna and she said, "I'm okay. I just need you to know I'm okay." Donna asked what happened. Alex said she would explain later. Donna, who had known her for 34 years, did not push. Alex sat on that curb for a long time after she hung up. The parking lot filled slowly around her, NOC staff arriving for the morning shift, a shuttle van idling by the put-in, someone hauling kayaks across wet gravel. Normal sounds. Daylight sounds. She sat in the middle of all of it with a dog in her lap and mud on her rain pants and did not cry. She was not ready to cry. The thing had not finished happening yet inside her chest. It needed more time to become real before it could become grief. She would not cry for 3 more weeks. It would happen in her sister's kitchen, a Tuesday morning, when she reached for a coffee mug, and it slipped and hit the tile floor and shattered. She would sit down on that floor, and she would not get up for an hour. Donna would sit down with her and not say anything, and that would be exactly right. Rangers went back to Rufus Morgan Shelter that morning. The 3 Daniels were gone. Their gear was gone. There was no fire residue in the pit consistent with an 8-hour burn, which the ranger noted and did not follow up on in his report. Tommy was there, sitting on the platform, awake, his original blue Nalgene in his hand, scuffed, sticker residue on the side, claiming everything was fine. He left the trail 2 days later from Fontana Dam and would not say where he was going. His family would tell people later that he seemed changed, calmer than before, but in the way that meant less, not more. The investigating ranger, 6 years working the Nantahala Gorge section, told a journalist 2 years later that Rufus Morgan was not the first shelter. It was the 5th, Carter Gap, Muskrat Creek, Standing Indian, Waya. Then Rufus Morgan. The group moved in a documented pattern, targeting early October thru-hikers specifically, the ones running out of trail miles, running out of purpose, the ones who had been alone long enough to ache for something that felt like being known. They had never been caught, because nothing technically had happened. In the ranger's notes from that morning, buried in a routine incident report filed October 23, 2019, there is a single line that has nothing to do with Alex's account. No one has explained it. It reads, "Trail register at Rufus Morgan. Entry 7. The same man was at Carter Gap. He had a different name. He was the same man." The entry is not dated. The handwriting does not match any registered hiker from that period. Alex kept the dog. She named her Rufus. She has never gone back to that section of trail. She will tell you if you ask that it has nothing to do with fear. She will tell you she just prefers the northern sections now. She will not look at you when she says it.